National park trails are designed to reduce uncertainty, clear signage, maintained paths, predictable risk. That promise has failed before. Across different parks, in different regions, incidents occurred on trails considered safe, monitored, and appropriate for the public. These were not reckless expeditions into forbidden zones. They were ordinary walks that escalated into situations authorities did not expect and could not easily explain. People vanished within sight of the trail. Emergencies unfolded without warning signs. Search operations began with confidence and ended with doubt. What links these cases is not terrain, not. It is proximity. Proximity to safety. Proximity to witnesses. Proximity to answers that never arrived. Lock your doors. Put on your headphones. Because after this video, you will never see a marked trail the same way again. The disappearance on a maintained trail. The disappearance did not begin with danger. It began with routine. The trail was open, maintained, and heavily traveled. Warning signs were visible. Rangers were present elsewhere along the route. Nothing about the conditions suggested elevated risk. This was not a backcountry gamble or an unauthorized detour. It was a walk designed to be safe. The hiker entered the trail during a period of stable weather. Visibility was clear. Temperatures were within seasonal expectations. Other visitors recalled seeing the individual at multiple points along the path, moving at a normal pace, stopping where others stopped, blending into the flow of foot traffic that never fully disappears on popular canyon routes. When the hiker failed to return, the delay was initially dismissed as ordinary. Fatigue, extended stops, photography. That assumption lasted only so long. Entry and exit estimates no longer aligned. By the time concern escalated, the timeline itself had become the first problem. The person should have been accounted for already. Search and rescue teams activated quickly. This was not a delayed response. Rangers focused first on the most probable outcomes. Injury near the trail, a fall within visible range, disorientation leading to short-off trail movement. Each scenario was addressed systematically. None produced evidence. What disturbed investigators was how little the environment reflected disruption. On maintained trails, evidence accumulates naturally. Footprints overlap, gravel shifts, items fall. Something usually appears quickly. Here there was nothing, no dropped equipment, no disturbed vegetation, no signs of a medical event or struggle. Aerial searches followed. Helicopters scanned below the trail and along the canyon walls. Thermal imaging was deployed during windows when a human heat signature should have been detectable. Nothing appeared. Ground teams expanded outward in calculated arcs. Still nothing. The hiker's background complicated matters further. They were not inexperienced. They were prepared appropriately. Water, clothing, and footwear were consistent with guidelines. There was no indication of recklessness, impairment, or deviation from expected behavior. Investigators noted that the individual did not appear to make any decision that would logically increase risk. As hours turned into days, the case resisted classification. Falls usually leave evidence. Disorientation usually leaves movement patterns. Wildlife interference leaves disruption. Voluntary departure leaves preparation. None of these variables fit. Witness statements were reviewed again. Timelines were cross-checked. Sightings remained consistent. The disappearance occurred within a narrow window on a trail where visibility and foot traffic should have eliminated gaps. That window should not exist, yet it did. Officials adjusted language in reports. Instead of stating what happened, documentation emphasized what could not be confirmed. No confirmation of a fall. No confirmation of departure, no confirmation of foul play. The case remained open but inactive, suspended without resolution. Internally, the incident forced uncomfortable discussion. Maintained trails are designed to reduce uncertainty. This case demonstrated that reduction is not elimination. It showed that proximity to safety does not guarantee traceability. A person can be present, observed, and then removed from the system without leaving a readable sequence behind. The trail remains open. Thousands walk it each year. There is no marker indicating where a person was last seen and never located. Visitors pause at overlooks, unaware that absence can occur in places engineered to prevent it. The canyon did not escalate danger gradually. It did not signal failure. It allowed normal movement until it did not. That is what transformed this incident from tragedy into warning. Not the loss itself, but the way it unfolded inside a framework built to prevent exactly this outcome. A safe trail did not become hostile. It became unreliable. And when reliability fails without explanation, fear does not come from what might happen next. It comes from realizing that even the safest paths can produce disappearance without noise, without error, and without anything left to correct. The sudden collapse, near a scenic overlook. The location was designed for safety, a designated overlook, guardrails, boardwalks engineered to keep visitors away from unstable ground, warning signs posted clearly, explaining the risks of heat, gases, and thin crust near thermal features. Thousands of people pass through the same spot every week without incident. That is why what happened there forced quiet re-evaluation. The victim was not behaving recklessly. They were not climbing barriers or leaving marked paths. Witnesses described them standing still, looking outward, doing exactly what the overlook was built for. There was no running, no panic, no visible distress in the moments before collapse. Then the body failed, not gradually, not with warning signs that medical responders expect. The person went down suddenly, losing consciousness almost immediately. Nearby visitors called for help. Rangers arrived quickly. This was not an isolated backcountry delay. Response time was measured in minutes. First aid procedures were initiated. Vital signs were inconsistent. Breathing was shallow, then irregular. There were no obvious external injuries. No signs of a fall. No trauma consistent with impact. The body appeared intact but unresponsive in a way that did not align cleanly with dehydration, altitude sickness, or cardiac history as understood at the time. Emergency transport was requested. Despite rapid intervention, the individual did not recover. What unsettled investigators was not the death itself. Sadly, fatalities occur in national parks every year. It was the location and progression. Scenic overlooks are categorized as low-risk zones. Exposure time is short. Activity level is minimal. The environment is monitored more closely than most interior areas. Medical review raised difficult questions. The collapse was too fast for heat exhaustion, as typically modeled. Gas exposure was considered, but air quality sensors in the area did not register levels known to cause immediate systemic failure. No equipment malfunction was identified. No pre-existing condition fully explained the speed and severity of the outcome. Witness accounts were consistent. There was no stumble or warning gesture. The victim did not appear disoriented beforehand. One moment they were standing, the next they were not. Rangers reviewed recent conditions. Thermal activity fluctuates naturally in Yellowstone. Vents shift, gas pockets migrate. Ground temperature can change subtly without visible surface alteration. None of these factors were extreme that day. Yet something crossed a threshold that existing safety assumptions did not account for. Internally, the case prompted review of how risk near thermal features is modeled. Not publicly announced. Procedural. Distances were reassessed. Exposure time guidance was rewritten. Rangers were instructed to intervene sooner when visitors lingered, even in designated areas previously considered safe. Visitors noticed changes before explanations. Increased warnings, shorter recommended stops, more ranger presence. The language shifted from education to caution. What made this incident disturbing was not mystery layered on mystery. It was clarity without explanation. Everyone agreed on what happened, where it happened, how fast it happened. What no one could agree on was why existing safeguards failed to provide margin. The overlook did not look dangerous. It did not feel dangerous, and yet it produced a fatal outcome without escalation. That forced an uncomfortable acknowledgement. In Yellowstone, danger is not confined to rule-breaking or remote exposure. It can surface briefly, precisely, in places engineered to feel controlled. The trail did not become chaotic. The ground did not give way. The body simply shut down in an environment assumed to be stable. That is what transformed this case into warning rather than anomaly. It showed that safety models based on averages and history can fail without notice, and when they do, there may be no time to react. The overlook remains open. People still stop there, photographs are still taken. Nothing marks the spot where assumptions stopped working. But for those who reviewed the case, one conclusion remained unavoidable. In Yellowstone, even compliance does not guarantee protection. Sometimes the environment decides faster than the body can respond. And when that happens, the line between safe and dangerous disappears without leaving a visible trace. The trail where communication failed at once. The Badlands are defined by exposure, long sight lines, minimal vegetation, rock formations that look complex from a distance but rarely block movement or visibility for long. Rangers consider this environment easier to manage than dense forest or steep alpine terrain. That assumption became a problem. The incident occurred on a maintained trail used regularly by visitors and staff. A mixed group of hikers and rangers entered the area under normal conditions. Weather was stable, no storms, no extreme temperatures. Equipment checks were routine. Radios, phones, and backup units were functioning before entry. The failure was not gradual. Within a short window, multiple devices stopped working at the same time. Handheld radios went silent. Mobile phones lost signal simultaneously. Backup channels produced only static. This was not one unit failing. It was a system-wide interruption across different devices, brands, and frequencies. Rangers attempted standard troubleshooting. Channel changes, power resets. Physical repositioning. Nothing worked. Visual contact between team members still existed briefly, but coordination collapsed. Instructions could not be relayed. Status updates stopped moving. What made the situation immediately serious was timing. The failure occurred during movement, not rest. Groups were transitioning between points, not stationary. The loss of communication froze decision-making. Without radio contact, teams could not confirm positions, redirect movement, or escalate response if needed. Visitors noticed first. Conversations stopped. People realized they could not reach anyone outside their immediate group. There was no panic, but there was confusion. In an environment marketed as open and manageable, silence felt wrong. After several minutes, visual contact broke as groups moved behind low ridges that should not have blocked line of sight for long. Distance did not increase significantly, but orientation degraded quickly. Without radios, even simple regrouping took far longer than expected. Eventually, communication returned. Not gradually, all at once. Radios resumed normal function. Phones regained signal. There was no announcement, no visible change in environment, no clear trigger for recovery. The interruption ended as cleanly as it began. Post-incident equipment testing showed no faults. Batteries were intact. Hardware functioned normally. Logs showed no abnormal usage or damage. Environmental data did not reveal weather or solar conditions known to disrupt communication at that scale. Rangers documented the incident conservatively. The language avoided speculation. It focused on response difficulty rather than cause. Official summaries framed the event as an operational anomaly without lasting impact. Internally, the response was different. Protocols were adjusted quietly. Teams were instructed to maintain tighter physical spacing in specific sections of the park. Visual confirmation became mandatory during transitions. Reliance on radio communication alone was reduced, replaced by layered redundancy that had not been considered necessary before. Visitors continued to report similar, smaller-scale disruptions. Brief radio silence. Phones losing signal in areas previously considered reliable. These reports rarely escalated beyond anecdotal mention, but they accumulated. What made this incident difficult to dismiss was simultaneity. Independent devices failed together, then recovered together. That pattern does not align with normal terrain interference. It suggests an environmental factor that affects systems broadly, but temporarily. The Badlands do not hide people easily. They hide coordination. That distinction matters. When communication fails in open terrain, small issues become isolated problems quickly. Help does not stop existing, but it stops being reachable. The trail did not become dangerous because of cliffs or animals. It became dangerous because connection disappeared without warning. No one was injured that day. No one went missing. That is why the case never became public-facing, but among rangers, it changed how the park was treated operationally. Safe trails depend on communication more than terrain. When communication fails without explanation, safety becomes conditional. The Badlands returned to normal that day. Radios worked, phones rang. Visitors finished their hikes unaware of how thin the margin had become, but the record remains. An event where silence arrived all at once, stayed just long enough to matter, then left without explanation. And that is why this incident belongs on this list. Not because something catastrophic happened, but because something foundational stopped working. And for a few critical minutes, a safe trail became a place where help existed, but could not be reached. That kind of failure does not need fear to be remembered. It only needs repetition. And this was not the last time it was noted. The experienced hiker who left the path and vanished. This incident unsettled investigators because it removed the most convenient explanation from the start. The hiker was not inexperienced. They were not unfamiliar with national parks, elevation changes, or long-distance movement. They understood trail systems, pacing, hydration, and the risks of leaving marked routes even briefly. The trail itself was classified as safe and well-maintained. Clear signage, regular ranger patrols, predictable terrain. The hiker was seen by others multiple times along the route, walking calmly, stopping where others stopped, behaving in a way that blended into normal trail traffic. At one point, witnesses reported the hiker stepping a short distance off the path. Not a descent, not a scramble, just a few steps, consistent with using the restroom, adjusting gear, or observing something nearby. This kind of movement happens constantly on popular trails and rarely produces consequences. That was the last confirmed sighting. When the hiker did not reappear on the trail within a reasonable time, concern did not immediately escalate. There was no reason to assume danger. The area offered no immediate hazards within that short distance. No steep drop-offs, no dense undergrowth capable of concealing movement instantly. Minutes passed, then longer. Other hikers noticed the absence and notified rangers. Search operations began quickly. Rangers first focused on the immediate surroundings. The area where the hiker stepped off the trail was examined carefully. There were no disturbed plants, no broken branches, no displaced soil, no dropped items. Nothing suggested injury, struggle, or rapid movement. The search expanded outward in measured stages. Canine units were deployed. Dogs picked up scent briefly, then lost it without a clear environmental reason. There were no streams or strong wind patterns to explain the sudden termination. The trail itself continued to show heavy foot traffic, but nothing branching away. Aerial searches followed. Helicopters scanned tree cover, granite features, and open clearings. Thermal imaging was used during periods when a human body should have been detectable. Nothing appeared. What complicated the case was scale. Yosemite is vast, but this disappearance occurred near a trail designed to prevent isolation. The hiker did not enter deep backcountry. They did not file a route change. They did not abandon equipment in preparation for extended movement. Investigators considered wildlife interaction. There were no signs. Predatory events leave disruption. Sound, evidence, none was present. Medical emergency was considered. Again, the environment offered no trace consistent with collapse or incapacitation. As days passed, the case resisted categorization. Leaving a trail briefly should not result in complete erasure. Even severe accidents usually leave fragments of evidence. Clothing, gear, location. Here, absence remained total. Internal discussions focused on probability rather than speculation. The odds of a person stepping a few steps off a trail and disappearing without trace are extremely low. Yet that is exactly what occurred. When probability collapses, confidence in assumptions collapses with it. The search eventually shifted to limited status, not because all questions were answered, but because all standard actions had been exhausted. The park offered no next variable to test. The trail remained open. Visitors continued walking past the location, unaware that disappearance had occurred there without warning or escalation. What made this case disturbing was not mystery layered on imagination. It was simplicity, a competent hiker, a safe trail, a brief deviation, and then nothing. No sound reported, no evidence recovered, no explanation that survived scrutiny. Yosemite is often described as dangerous because of scale and beauty. This case suggested a different risk, that sometimes the margin between presence and absence is smaller than training, experience, and design are willing to admit. The hiker did not make a dramatic mistake. They did not test the limits of terrain. They stepped away briefly from a system built to keep people visible, and that system failed without announcing its failure. That is why this incident changed how rangers think about proximity. Not how far someone goes, but how little distance it can take to remove them entirely. A safe trail did not turn violent, it turned indifferent. And indifference, when combined with scale, is enough to make fear permanent. The rescue attempt that could not reach the victim. This incident did not involve disappearance, it involved presence. That is what made it harder to accept. The hiker was visible from multiple vantage points. After slipping on a narrow section of trail carved into the canyon wall, the individual came to rest on a ledge below the main path. They were injured, but conscious. They moved. They responded to voices. Witnesses could see them clearly. Emergency services were contacted immediately. Rangers arrived fast. This was not a remote backcountry delay. The trail was popular, monitored, and within rapid response range. On paper, this was a solvable situation. The first attempts focused on verbal communication and assessment. The victim could not climb back up. Injuries limited movement. The ledge was stable enough to support weight, but too narrow to allow safe self-rescue. Time mattered, but the situation was not yet critical. Rescue teams prepared rope systems. Anchors were identified. Helicopter support was requested as backup. Zion conducts technical rescues regularly. The terrain is challenging, but procedures are well established. That is when the environment began to interfere. Wind patterns along the canyon wall became inconsistent. Not strong enough to ground aircraft completely, but unstable enough to prevent precise positioning. Helicopter pilots reported sudden downdrafts that appeared without warning and disappeared just as quickly. Hovering long enough to deploy rescue lines became unsafe. Ground teams encountered similar resistance, anchor points that appeared solid fractured under load. Not catastrophic failures, but enough to force immediate retreat. The rock behaved unpredictably, shedding small sections that compromised safety margins. Rescue leaders adjusted tactics, different angles, different anchor locations, different approach timing. Each attempt reached the same barrier, proximity without access. Throughout this, the victim remained visible. That detail weighed heavily on responders. This was not a search for someone lost. It was a struggle to reach someone who should have been reachable. As hours passed, the victim's condition deteriorated. Communication became weaker. Eventually, it stopped. When teams finally managed to reach the ledge later, the individual had died. The official report emphasized terrain complexity, wind conditions and inherent risk. All accurate, none sufficient. Zion's terrain had not changed overnight. Similar rescues had succeeded under comparable conditions. Internally, the case triggered review. Rescue leaders analyzed why redundancy failed, why air and ground options were simultaneously neutralized, why visibility did not translate into access. Protocols were adjusted afterward, not publicly announced. Approach thresholds changed. Certain ledge rescues were reclassified as higher risk earlier in the response cycle. Helicopter engagement criteria were tightened. What made this incident unsettling was not tragedy alone. It was helplessness, standing within sight of someone and realizing that skill, equipment, and urgency were not enough. The canyon did not conceal the victim. It displayed them. That distinction matters. It shows that in some environments, danger does not come from being unseen, it comes from being unreachable. Zion is marketed as a park of narrow beauty and managed adventure. This case revealed a harsher reality. Some trails appear safe until they demand rescue, and when they do, the margin for success can collapse suddenly. The trail did not fail structurally. The systems around it did, and that is why this incident transformed perception. Not because a rescue failed, but because it failed while everything that should have enabled success was already in place. Fear does not come only from the unknown. It comes from watching effort fail in plain sight, and once that happens, no trail feels entirely safe again. These incidents did not happen in remote danger zones. They happened where safety was assumed. Marked trails, clear rules, fast response. None of that prevented confusion, failure, or loss. When systems designed to protect people stop working without warning, fear does not come from the place itself. It comes from realizing how thin the margin really is. Which case unsettled you the most and why? Write it. And if you believe safety is not about signs, but about what happens when something goes wrong, stay here. Some paths do not change. Our trust in them does.